Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to our third and final lecture of Historic St. Mary City's lecture series for the fall. This is a lecture that
Good evening, everybody.
we were
Welcome
hoping to
our third
have.
and final
Ooh.
lecture of Historic St. Mary's.
I apologize, we're having
lecture
technical
series for the fall.
difficulties.
This is a lecture that.
Sorry, I had the YouTube going on a different device and it started playing, and so there might be a little bit of feedback, so I apologize, folks. But this was a lecture that we had originally slated for May, but because of extraordinary circumstances this year, we've had to push it back, but I'm very excited to be able to have this lecture. And before I do our full introduction of our guest, I do want to say a couple of things that, one, these lecture series have been provided by the Historic St. Mary City Foundation, who graciously raises money and has members that contribute to the museum and the mission to provide support to provide programs like this and all the other activities that we have done recently in this year and will continue to do into next year when we do our lectures and other programs, as hopefully we can go live again in the spring. So we thank the Historic St. Mary City Commission, Foundation, and all our members that help support us. Two, this is an important year as well. As a reminder, this is the 100th anniversary of the passage of women's suffrage as a constitutional amendment. And one of the goals for this lecture series was to have all women scholars and topics about women. So that is one of the topics we have again today. And so we're very honored to have Dr. Gabrielle Tayac as our guest speaker today. Tayac is a member of the Piscataway Indian Nation. She's an activist, scholar committed to empowering Indigenous perspectives. Gabby earned her PhD and MA in sociology from Harvard University and her Bachelor's of Science in Social Work and American Indian Studies from Cornell University. Her scholarly research focuses on hemispheric American Indian identity, multiracialism, Indigenous religions, and social movements, maintaining a regional specialization in the Chesapeake Bay. Gabby served on the National Museum of the American Indian staff for 18 years as an educator, historian, and curator, which is a fabulous museum. If you've never been, you should go. She just returned from a 2-year journey to uplift the voices of Indigenous elder women leaders, sponsored by the Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors. Gabby has now settled back into the local area and is a principal investigator for the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. She lives in Tacoma Park, Maryland, with her children, Sebastian and Jansqui. I hope I pronounced that right. I apologize if I didn't. I forgot to ask Gabby if that. She is also a professor at George Mason University in history. I should also note that with Historic St. Mary City, we have had a on-again and off-again relationship with Piscataway people. When the museum first started, we had help with the Piscataway to build our native village. Some of that relationship subsided and it's come back. Gabby has been a member of our board of commissioners advising the museum. And most recently, I'm proud to say that as we're endeavoring in a major capital project of hopefully building a new visitor center called the Maryland Heritage Interpretive Center, Gabby has been very, very important in letting us know about how we tell the story in our exhibits and helping us to curate the story of the Piscataway people and other Native people and their lives in Maryland, starting well before the English colonists arrived and the impact of the English afterwards. And that's one of her topics. That is where the basis of her lecture today is. Arise, Nansen, Restoring the Indigenous Feminine. And so I think this will be hopefully this Restoring the Indigenous Feminine just brings me chills because it makes me think that this partnership is continuing to grow and its revitalization between Historic St. Mary City and the Piscataway people. So without further ado, I'd like to bring up our guest speaker, Gabby Tayac. All right, Gabby.
Okay, well, all good greetings to you, Peter, and to those who have joined us this evening. I think this is a particularly important time for us to work towards uncovering our stories and spending some time together tonight. It's through this virtual world. In some ways, I'm sitting here talking to myself, but I can also see on the chat that we have one of the great matriarch of Rematriation with us, Louise Bear, students, colleagues, friends, sisters, family, and many of you that we've been so far apart from each other, but this also gives us a sense, a way to come into conversation. When we think about this year 2020, how much on the edge of things we've been. And at the same time, when we look back, there have been other times when other women and men and children have stood at the edge of what the world was that they knew as it was about to change. So, 2020, year of the woman, it really brings up the way we think about history and memory. So I'm going to, I think Peter has brought up my slides, or I can bring up my slides. I'm going to bring up my slides, actually, if that's okay. I just want to make sure everybody can see them. Okay. So and at this point, I can only see my slides. I can't see you in the chat, and so we'll be able to reconvene. I'll be able to see who's there, and we'll be able to talk some more. But really, when we talk about history and we talk about memory, something that's so important to understand is, what is it that we choose to remember? What is it that we choose to forget? And how we can make that choice. So many of us, especially in this Chesapeake region and throughout the Atlantic seaboard and really throughout the Indigenous world, there have been stories and memories that have been kept within our people, but some that have slipped so deeply that we don't know who these people are. And sometimes it just feels like they're waiting for us to find them. So a lot of this is about really uncovering what is all around us, what's under the ground, understanding what has been erased, which is so often the Indigenous. We see Indigenous words in our rivers, in our places, our place names, and then within our communities that still remain. But we don't know the names that are not there, and what has not traveled through time with us. And really, all too often, what's even further submerged is the feminine, is the story of women, is the story of that side. And so this gives us an opportunity, when you start to know that it's like what I call the presence of the absence, that something is missing and you know it's missing. So as you travel through time and through work, to keep looking for that. I think also, I've been trying to figure out what happened to us, to our Piscataway people who are here on the western shore of the Chesapeake, all along the Potomac, and have had this lifelong, going from the kitchen table, listening to elders, talking to people, and learning different perspectives. I also have to say a great gratitude to the Haudenosaunee women teachers who really opened that possibility that there is such a massive side to what we're looking for and what we need to regain. So I know that a lot of times when I'm introduced, it kind of goes into a lot of the academic credentials, but the real teachers, what I feel are the ones who really have shaped the knowledge, are the people that are knowledge carriers, and how grateful I am to them. So here is a name, Nannsonan. I had never heard this name before. And I had done a great deal of research in addition to listening to people and people like my Uncle Billy, my father, others along the way for years and years and years, and digging through not just for scholarly study, but for land rights issues, for reburial and land protections matters, truly thousands of pages of material over time, and we just sometimes don't get everything. So it was very interesting that after spending probably, I don't know, maybe about 20 years looking through the material of trying to find out, some of the details of Piscataway, and also looking through books like on this. I think it's probably your right-hand side, this book, Archives of Maryland, which brings together all of the transcribed proceedings of the Colonial Council. You can just go on and on with it forever. But then it starts around between around the 1630s, 1640s. There's a lot of material about Piscataway people, and then it starts to waver off, and it just becomes a whisper. And so I hadn't really looked much beyond 1700 in it. And then I found this amazing thing that the Archives of Maryland had been digitized and put online. And that meant that you could, if you're really into it, you could use it like clickbait. And so this is where I was looking through, again, some of the things I had seen so many times. There was a treaty called the Articles of Peace and Amity of 1666, and it really outlines how the different tribes that were affiliated and different peoples that are affiliated with the Piscataway people became consolidated, where their lands are, what their continuing rights were. And so I just started to put their names in of the different interrelated peoples, and one of them is Chaptico. And I put in Chaptico, and I'm clicking and clicking and clicking, and then it lands on this passage, and it says, "Upon the application of 7 Chaptico Indians, on the behalf of Nannsonan, their queen, ordered that the goods which were found to have been stolen out of the said queen's daughter's tomb, and now in the custody of John Rose, late constable of Chaptico 100. And I'm like, who is this? Who is Nannsonan? I had never heard of her. And there she is, right in the area of our people. And another piece really stuck out to me. Goods which were found to have been stolen out of the said queen's daughter's tomb, and now in the custody of John Rose, late constable. When we see tomb robbing and desecration of the graves and of the burial grounds of so many of our people, it's something that we know has happened certainly in the 19th century, in the 20th century. It was something that galvanized our people to protect our grave sites. And then seeing that this is done on a date of April 5th, 1707. And then the direction to be delivered to the said queen, or such she shall direct to receive the same, and likewise ordered that the said Indians apply to the Honorable Kenelm Cheseldian Esquire, who will see justice done them. And this sets up a relationship, first of all, that becomes very invisible, very unclear about the fact that there were still people, Native people, Chaptico people, affiliated and under the auspices of the Piscataway, who were acting as sovereigns at this late date of 1707. So I want to get to the thought of this part of the pull of this and the pull of this story is our relationship as Piscataway people, particularly to the dead. Our ancestors buried those who had passed into the spirit world in a very particular and careful way. They were brought together as they died and laid out into what we call a mortuary or house of repose. And our people were then set together. And when a number of people had died, they were then bundled and buried together so that they could go into the spirit world together. Our people are very distinctive, along with others in the Chesapeake area, the Nanticoke people to the eastern shore, and the Powhatans to the south, that there's a very distinctive way that we care for the dead, and that the dead travel together to the spirit world. And when they're put into their place of burial, they are put there for not just final resting place, but also for them to act as intermediaries between the living and the dead. It is absolutely essential in Piscataway spiritual belief and knowledge that ancestors must be in the ground. This is something that our people have fought for probably the past 100 years. This photo is my Aunt Julie Tayac Yates, who is standing aside the grave of my grandfather, Turkey Tayac, who was our traditional leader and herbal doctor. He was buried in our ancestral burial grounds alongside the Potomac River in direct gaze to George Washington's Mount Vernon, because our burial grounds were right in the center of our chief's town of Piscataway. I just want to pause and tell you the story briefly, that as he was dying in 1977, 1978, he had made an agreement about 20 years before that he should be able to be buried in our ancestral ancient burial grounds. He was an old-time man, and he shook the hands of the Secretary of Interior. There was never a piece of paper. So when he died, and when he was diagnosed with terminal cancer, he went ahead and started to actually lobby for his own traditional burial, and was told he would have to get an act of Congress. He died in 1978. Before that had come through, and then my uncle Billy and many others, thousands of other people, banded together and over the year moved to pass an act of Congress to bury him with his ancestors. So that patch of what you see as that grass, it's not just him, but there are actually thousands of ancestors buried there. And it was also an issue where there had been certainly from our point of view, and many other people of conscience had the point of view that the land that had been ransacked of our ancestors, hundreds of bones brought into the Smithsonian and other institutions, really were an issue of grave robbery. And so what we see here is that he was finally buried. It's a place where we go for prayer and traditional practice. We care for that place. We protect our ancestors, and our ancestors protect us. So this really gave this even further depth to the story of when is it that we meet Nannsonan in 1707. When did I see her? When she clicked alive, like she clicked awake. And she is someone who is looking for the restitution of the robbery of her daughter's tomb. It's very interesting that the English point of view of this is really focused on the goods, the valuables, rather than the spirit of the woman who was robbed and the effect upon the living. The idea that 7 Chaptico people went to the constable at that time and sought legal reparations is highly significant to me. This is where we encounter them. So it's one of those points where history can seem like it's a long way away, but the Piscataway people have been living this story over and over again over time. So I want to tell you a little bit more about Chaptico first, because it is a place that they were a people, Chaptico people. Piscataway was a wider chiefdom, and a chiefdom means that there is basically a more centralized, higher, what was considered to be a higher status. So we're not really a confederacy. We're really a more ranked chiefdom, or that was our tradition. It had a number of what they call tributary tribes, but it's really people that are aligned for mutual aid and benefit, that work more towards the center. So Chaptico is one of about at least a dozen who came under the jurisdiction of the Piscataway, who were at the center. Chaptico was also a reservation. They think it might have been the first one established in Anglo-America, established in 1651, maybe the first one. And the intent was for civilization and for Christianity. So here you have some maps that can show you. I don't think there's a pointer on this system, but essentially, if you can look, there's the Chesapeake Bay. Look down, there's the Potomac River, that little point, St. Mary's City, and then you go up. Basically, all of the tributaries, all of the creeks, all of the rivers throughout the Chesapeake Bay. If you look at a map, from a map that was done by John Smith and put out by 1612, our region was full of people on every waterway. So Chaptico is one of those people. It's also it became a stronghold for the people who stayed, because as I'll explain a little bit later, many of the Piscataway people and the interrelated subnations did leave Maryland at the invitation of the Haudenosaunee, and they made their way up into Pennsylvania. But there were people who stayed behind, and Chaptico was the place where the people stayed behind. So it really was a stronghold for those who stayed. So we have from 1651 until 1712, that is a very direct, bounded, cohesive stronghold of those who came together to help each other. And as you follow them through time, their last culturally based, outwardly recognized sovereign was a woman named Nannsonan, who appeared to speak for her child. What you can see also in the photo, Dr. Julie King from St. Mary's College was kind enough to share this material with me. It kind of goes around because when I first popped into the story, we found that I was really interested in Nannsonan, but I was also really interested in how she sat alongside this issue of the people that she made her complaint to. Actually became two men who took the reservation lands after the Protestants took over from the Catholics, and gave those lands away to their own children instead of keeping it in place as a native space. Dr. King managed to find, we had been talking about it, so years later she issued a report in 2014 where she found the materials that had to do with Chaptico as a Indian town, Indian reservation, and these are some of the materials that come out of the ground, and also so you can get a sight line on what it looked like physically and what it does look like today. And again, understanding that there are so many lives in these grounds. I want to talk more tonight, though, about Nannsonan as a woman with a power, and as what her lineage would be. Really 100. Think about this. Jamestown was invaded, aka settled, in 1607. We're talking about 1706, 1707. It's 100 years after the English come, and they are not leaving. So I'd like to go back a bit so that you could understand, and that I can understand, and start to sort through what is it that Nannsonan is carrying as a Piscataway Chaptico woman. I want to take a second, just say that I love this image. This is done by an artist, two artists named Christy Belcourt and Isaac Murdoch on New Beginnings, and she really, I think, captures that feel of an Indigenous woman and her relationship to the cosmos. I'm talking quite a bit about women. You have to understand that this is about speaking into the silence that's been left, so that there was a balance cosmically, cosmologically, ideologically, in terms of spiritual traditions, the way that Algonquian people, which the Piscataway is a part, almost all of our people, peoples that are across the woodlands, see the world in a balance. You'll see it from one side to the other. It doesn't mean there's just a sharp line and a sharp line, but that one fills in the other space of the masculine and the feminine. Actually, right now, as we're going into the winter time, it's much more of what's considered in our cosmology a more masculine season, and there's always some feminine in it. And then as the plant world reawakens, it really comes into more of a feminine. So there's a balance, and there are roles that Nannsonan is carrying with her that so far supersede any kinds of empowerment that any English woman, any European woman, any European society at the time is also, it's so far different. So when we talk about the year of the woman and we talk about suffrage, the idea being that in the Euro-American system, it was women claiming a kind of empowerment and reality as full human beings, and recognized for being that for the first time. They learned this and were highly influenced to claim this status from Haudenosaunee women. It's really some amazing work I would encourage you to look at that has been done by Sally Roche Wagner and also Louise Baer, who's I think maybe still online tonight. So I would really encourage you to look at that. So Piscataway people are matrilineal, meaning that our lineage originally was coming through the mother. women were in relationship to primarily to the plant world. So about 70% of what could be called an economy was based on agriculture, gathering plant materials, house materials. All of that was coming from the plant world. They also were able to practice what we call a Three Sisters agriculture, which is a brilliant form of companion planting that came probably from some brilliant female agronomists in Mexico who developed the corn, beans, and squash agriculture. They had status as healers, as clan mothers, as councilwomen, and also as chiefs in their own right. These women were called the Varawanskwa, and they were not just chiefs and leaders because they might have been married to a man in power, but within their own right, they could be the chiefs in their own, from their own merit and from their own position. Throughout the Piscataway world. And so Nannsonan is clearly, when they talk about her as a queen, you see these old terms like the queen of Pamunkey and the queen of Chaptico or the king of Anacostia. These are just terms. Sometimes we go back at them and we laugh at them and we say, oh, that's not the right word. And no, it's not the right word. It's the word the English used at the time, but it does transmit a sense of authority. So this is the kind of world that she is coming from the 100 years prior, up to her time in the early 1700s. And then we have a cataclysmic, apocalyptic event and series of events. I like to think about this as a strange man's takeover. I was thinking about titling this slide Alien Invasion, but it didn't happen all at once. We know that in 1565, the Spanish were coming into the Chesapeake Bay. They called it the Bahia de Santa Maria. And they did take captive several young Indigenous men probably from the Powhatan peoples, brought them into Europe. We know this was happening in the place that became New England. Also very early incursions that were happening all up and down the Atlantic coast. So before there was even a settlement or an intrusion that was there permanently, we already have a disruption. We also already have waves of pandemics from the late 1400s coming down from Newfoundland and all throughout the Atlantic coastal region. So before anybody even ever sees a boat, there are extreme disruptions and changes taking place. In 1634, and I know we're speaking for St. Mary's City because St. Mary's is where really this it's where it happened. 1634, two boats came called the Ark and the Dove. They initially went to go see the Tayac or the High Chief, and he said this was in a place called Akoki. He said no, sent them way further down to a place called Yakamako, which is where they set up their fort. I think that at that point, the Piscataway people were no strangers to what could happen, because in 1607, years before, the Powhatans already had been dealing with Jamestown. Captain John Smith, who was not so, blonde and cute as what we see in Disney. They had already been aware of and actually involved in armed conflict, taking the Powhatan side. The disruptions that had already happened because of fur trade were coming down. So by 1634, This was not a pristine, like, oh, what are those ships? Are they great birds? Like, that's not what was happening here in Maryland. People were very well aware of what was going on. Maryland is distinctive in that it was an Anglo-Catholic colony. What you see here is a stained glass that was done to commemorate the baptism of the Indian king. His name was Kidamakan, July 5th, 1640, in a church called St. Ignatius, which is where our family still goes for Catholic Mass, and family members are still buried there. So there's a conversion into a Christian patriarchal society. There are complete takeovers of land. People are then made subject to the crown. I think we all have a much better sense, even just like a small sense of what can happen in a pandemic, what happens. The warfare, the clearing of land for tobacco, which was a cash crop. And when you take that land and clear cut for a tobacco economy, what it does is it tries to erase Native people off of land. And very soon, enslaved Africans are kidnapped and brought onto these lands. There are agreements after agreements being made called Articles of Peace and Amity, which all sound very friendly, but then you see over and over and over again that there's a push further and further, constantly broken over the period of about 70 years. And the Piscataway experience a massive diaspora. So the majority of the Piscataway government goes into Pennsylvania. Eventually, they become called the Kanoi and blend with our people, the Nanticoke, and those words are still spoken in the Haudenosaunee world. And then there are those that end up going west, going south. Some people, like the Waikamas and the Doeg, are eventually so completely decimated that their survivors who are in resistance are sold into slavery into the West Indies. So this is all occurring as the backdrop for Nannsenan's world. It took, just to go back into this case. So I did the click on April 5th. It's April 5th, 1707, and I'm just taking a look at this here. And so, of course, that then gets me interested in the idea that there's a constable and, who are these people? So we start to do these searches and find that the case actually started in the year before, in 1706, that a complaint had been made on behalf of diverse Indians living in Charles County that a tomb wherein an Indian queen is buried has been broke open and robbed, and diverse goods of a considerable value stolen thence by Englishmen and women living contiguous to the Indian land. And then stating that this is going to be, research, investigated and prosecuted to the full extent of the law. Now, when I check on Nannsonan first, it's a year later, April 5th, so another year's gone by, nothing's going on. We go to July 1707, so a little bit further down the line, and then you see something really compelling there, which is with the Chaptico Indians, that the queen is very aged and not caring further to trouble with the government, that she's not able to rule them. So there's a man named Robin, who they elect and select, a man that's being called Robin Montague, to govern them as their king until two young princes should come to age and desired him to obtain his excellency's permission should he so. So essentially what's going on there is that there is there's a succession. So the native people, the Chaptico people, and the people that are there with them, they make a selection of who they want. And at this point, and this has been already going on for some time, actually, is that the English themselves are the provincial authorities are having to certify the election, or they're having to, say that they're in agreement. So you see a real change, and we don't know who these two young princes are. We do know that Tayac's son has come to Chaptico and is there, so it's very possible that it's people that are, some young men that are actually in place. So we know that Nannsonan herself is getting really old and is withdrawing, and this case is still not really resolved. It still goes on to 1709. She is still not completely. She's still not being compensated. And then in 1711, we hear that there are 10 pounds that are paid. I'm assuming it's for the recompense, but we don't really know. So it takes at least 5 years for this case, for the stolen goods to be compensated, but we don't know if they ever come back to her, what happens with the tomb, what happens with the grave, grave protections. But we do know that within a year, by 1712, there becomes an eerie, resounding silence at Chaptico. We don't hear more of people being reported in the record as sovereign. We do know that there are people that continue, but not in the sense of having that kind of traditionally based authority. So really, Nannsonan is the last one overtly who is making that appearance, a woman seeking justice for her daughter. This is a time, I think, to think about how this works with us now and how that's worked over time. And by bringing these, you find this, you can just see like what the story we're telling and the context we're telling this in, or that I'm looking at. There's so little, there's just these little snippets that are there after 1700, little tiny pieces. And so it becomes really important for us to think about how they work in the culture, the stories that our families have told us, what we see in the ground, what is it that we know, and then continue to keep an eye open for what that is. But if we don't look at, if we don't look through the lens of women, and then understanding what that relationship is for women to regain another level of balance back into history, or what's been called her story, then we really are also cut off from understanding how it is and who it is that we are, what our relationship to places and to each other, and how is it that we came into loss and how we come back into restoration. So that's the act of rematriation. And rematriation, I actually first heard this word from some Tuscarora women. I'd actually gone to Oxford, England to go look at an amazing object called Powhatan's mantle. And it's one of the few surviving material objects. It's masterful, that was sent from the Powhatan to into England, or was either stolen or brought there. Ends up in Oxford in the 1630s. I'd gone to look at it, and of course I'm looking at this thing. I start crying, so I started texting back, home across the sea to a number of women from Native women from Virginia, North Carolina, Maryland. And I'm like, I'm looking at this right now. And somebody texts and they say, repatriate, repatriate. And then I think it was a really well-known singer, activist, Purafe, writes back to me. She said, no, rematriate, rematriate. So I was like, rematriate. I'm like, yeah, that's exactly it. And then also then learning about how this concept of rematriation is really a founding structural principle that's been highlighted so powerfully and brilliantly, particularly from Indigenous women in the North, especially Haudenosaunee women. We see there's a group called Gunungwe Council, who has Rematriation magazine. And this idea of returning women's strength, returning that essential relationship that comes from Mother Earth herself and flows through us in so many ways. So this is a very contemporary and vital responsibility and accountability and joy that we have. And I wanted to share some contemporary photos. I just love this work that we have Piscataway women in all of these pictures. There is Shada Kode, her mother, Hope Butler, Piscataway women. This photo was just taken at I think it was like right before election day, and Shada got up and spoke, and there's her mom, backing her up, and I just love it. Count on us. So Piscataway women being so close and in and around DC, we play that role as well, along with men. But there's a lot of women really standing up. To the other side is my daughter Jansikwe, who is named for my great grandmother Jan Sipi. Her name means beautiful river woman, and my daughter-in-law Brenda, and that's them coming back to. We built a women's lodge, so that was the day that they were doing that. To the other side, you'll see there's me with cousins and Aunt Valerie and Nora and Aunt Julie. We had gone to look at and give blessings and renew relationships at National Museum of the American Indian in the collection. So many of these things that, have been robbed, that have been taken out of the ground, they are in museums, and there's a repatriation process. So he had gone to go and give some communing with them, and they're being so well taken. There's a lot also that is there in stewardship and in right relationship, rather than just being ripped out and taken out of place. And then just wanted to also say, Piscataway women are everywhere, and all the way over to the other side is Nikki Tayac, Nisha Sri Lanka. Her name's means seven wings woman, at National Museum of the American Indian, coming in from San Diego, and her mother Sarita, who's down at the bottom, who had gone into Hawaii with Kanaka Maoli Native Hawaiian people to go and pay respects and support them in their work towards protecting their burial grounds. So this is also a lineage of protecting ancestors, protecting and honoring ancestors, and having them be meaningful and walk with us in our lives. So, when we talk about 100 years, 1920 to 2020, it's a long, long time. We're talking, we can talk back to 1720 to 1620, to the beginnings of corn and the beginnings of time, is where these histories flow from, and how they intersect, and how we decide about how we're going to work with them to become meaningful and to create positive change. So I would definitely invite you to take a moment and say her name. Say her name. Nannsonan. 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 And remember her. And as my kids would say, stay woke. So with that, let's open it up for conversation. I'm still learning about her. She's been on my shoulder for probably like over 10 years now, and it's good to spend an evening thinking about her with you tonight.
Thank you, Gabby. That had a lot to think about, and I'm still wrapping my thoughts around everything you brought towards us. And I hope people will be bringing any questions or thoughts that they may have, so we can continue this conversation. But one of the things that you said very early in your presentation that I've been pondering and thinking about, and as myself being a historian and seeing how these connections happen, and sometimes we, in our culture, the American culture, think of history as these blocks of time that are separate from each other. And in many ways, time is more like a river, and that it's constantly flowing, and little things may change, but many things stay the same, and the water moves around different things and then reconnects. And so as much as things change, they also stay the same. And what really got me thinking about that is this, I don't want to say conflict, but this ask, this constant, I am here, please acknowledge me. These are my people, acknowledge me. That in 1700, people were dealing with grave robbery.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't just until very recently that this country passed laws to prevent grave robbery and to, in fact, return burial goods to Native peoples with NAGPRA. And in some ways, people are still flabbergasted that, what do you mean I can't just take these things, or the museums are expected to honor Native people and give them back? And it's like, why are they suddenly doing this? And it's like, well, they haven't been suddenly doing this. Here's evidence that Native people have been doing this for a long time.
Yeah, like that's what really it's what really struck me also in this case, that it was we tend to look at people in that time period, thinking, yes, they're actively engaged in their very survival, but they're also working to protect their dead, right? So I think that's it's an ongoing issue, and also thinking that Piscataway in particular have been very much at the forefront, along with others, but very much at the forefront, even going into Geneva and the United Nations from the 1980s, from the 1970s, trying to work towards the protection of graves and against desecration. So, Piscataway, the burial grounds where my grandfather is buried, that was chosen by International Indian Treaty Council in 1983 to be the primary case for the Americas on desecration. Right? Like it shows like that there is this core value, this very core value, right? That goes with us. And so, and I think about, I think, history is a river, but but like here, the rivers are tidal. They go out, they come back, right? They go out, they come back. Like we're people with the tides, like something leaves, it comes back. So that's, it's a very important way of thinking about it, that, it's not done, it's always in process. So
I'm getting lots of comments, not too many questions, but people are excited, and I think are just feeling inspired by what you had to say, and making them want to go out and do their own research and help continue to make right what was wrong.
So I just want to say, I do see one about a peace queen in constant communication with Washington, wondering if that was one that was the same up from Haudenosaunee. So, you know, it is very interesting, and also wondering if there was somebody who was playing that role at the time. I would really like to learn more about her. So it was definitely, so this would be a little bit later. If she was dealing with Washington, D.C., it would have been probably, you know, would have been after maybe 1790. So it would be really interesting to see like the kinds of roles that people that are looked at as, you know, in that queen role or that negotiation role as a peace queen. I'd love to hear more about that at some point. So it's nice to see your question. Thank you.
Another thing that struck me that you said that reminds me of cultures and how cultures might come into contact with each other or in conflict and misunderstandings in their perceptions, and then which leads to unfortunate stereotypes. Is you mentioned how women were with the plants and took care of the gardens and grew the crops, the three sisters. And I know from my studies, you know, that's in Piscataway culture, that's what happened. And the men would go out hunting and find the deer or fish and bring it back. And from the English perspective, they're coming over and taking over and looking at this culture and trying to understand it themselves. And one of the first things that they see that's very different in a way, because they have such a regimented, rigid society, that the men are farming, the men take care of the crops, the men go out and grow the grain. And only wealthy men who don't really have much to do go hunting. And that has always struck me of, you know, it's a very unfortunate stereotype that sometimes I think people have of Native people being lazy. And it just makes me wonder if you've ever thought about that I'm not justifying it, it's trying to understand it. That where that kind of stereotype comes from, that is this perception of like, oh, what, they're out hunting and they're making the women do that, and then what's the opposite perspective is you guys are doing women's work. and so it's just this interesting duality of cultures, and I've always thought about that for some reason.
Yeah, no, that brings up a good point, because it's definitely, you know, it is a stereotype that you see and an interpretation that you see in real time of how Anglo society is looking at Native society. I think first of all, it's you know, so deeply undervaluing women, you know, and the fact that if a woman is working and is active, that's something that is claiming a position of power, respect, and responsibility, versus the idea that she's been put to this as, you know, the drudge, you know. So the idea that women would be engaged in work, and that it's not in a ranked kind of work, right? Because I think from Anglo society, the idea is that, you know, certainly most, you know, physical labor in the fields is, you know, it's like a peasant class type of thing versus a self-sufficient. The relationship between understanding what it is to have that connection spiritually and in terms of identity with things that grow out of the earth, right? So there's that piece of it. And then not understanding the way that time and seasons are organized, not understanding the way that, for example, the way that people lived on the land. So there's, I think with English viewpoints, there's this, you know, intense fixation on what private property is. so that, and this became, one other layer of issue is that because people here, they may not be in the village the whole time. They may not be in the fields the whole time. Like around this time of year, they might be starting to get ready to go out into hunting and trapping camps for a while. So, English people would come upon these, like what they called abandoned towns, and take them over. And then the native people would come back, when it was time to plant. And it's like, there's these other people there. And so, these different viewpoints. But I think also to justify, I think some of that also has to do with an idea of like, if you start to cast the other as brutish, right, and uncivilized, that it gives you more of a justification for saying that their society isn't healthy and it needs to be changed, when we all really know what they were after. They're after the land, they're after land, and not able to create like a collaborative relationship. I mean, it was truly a full on takeover. It's a very interesting cultural practice. I think from Anglo society in particular, I would love to see more actually anthropology done on that, which is why is it like, what is it about purity, and what is it about having a complete takeover over of land? There's a German concept for this called Lebensraum, which has to do with like a complete takeover of more pure people, right? So it's just it's very ingrained. That's a fascinating question. It'd be very interesting to continue to explore that question.
Thank you. We got some more. I want to go back. Let's see here. We got this one. Do you know what the name Nansen means? Name or title?
I don't. And so I'm super curious about this. And I was actually thinking about the talk. I was like, oh, I should be, but we need to figure this out. I don't know if there's any Algonquin speakers on with us tonight. Sometimes I've worked with, especially like Maliseet, Mi'kmaq speakers, sometimes just to like float it, because that term Nan, right? Like we see it a lot. And I'm really curious about it. And then you also have these like weird Anglicizations of names, and it gets so corrupted. But I would love to know more. So yeah, that's kind of, I'm kind of viewing tonight more as like let's have a conversation and try to figure some stuff out. And I think it's worth it to work it out. I see like one of the quotes too about this idea that the fact that, yeah, she had her name, like she had her name. Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yep, go ahead.
I thought you were referring to this one next, but
No.
This was another question that came up. The English felt a monetary restitution. Why not return the items?
That's a great question. It makes me wonder, like, again, like the idea that something could just be monetized, that it's like looking for land sale, right? And the idea that you could just pay and that money is enough. Whereas, the value, especially of something that somebody would have been buried with, the idea would be, what was she buried with? It's definitely something that the English felt were valuable. So, maybe it was silver, like maybe it was a cross, maybe, there could have been all kinds of things that she would have been buried with that would have been considered to have some monetary value. But that's a great question. Why not? And also, what happened to the people that stole it? It was like they're going to be prosecuted to the full extent of law, but then you don't ever see anything about them anymore. They don't like drag these people out and say, oh, here's these people, they stole this, like this is what's going to happen to them. So, again, like what we also see very, very much throughout this time period is a major double standard of what happens to Native people, God help them. Like when if a Native person is ever accused of having stolen anything from an English person, I mean, that set off the whole, Bacon's Rebellion, Dog War, over some pigs. So, which I get, are important and everything, but it's really the level of double standard is massive, and I think there's another, there's kernels of that in this case to follow. It's a great question, Hope.
That is a good one. This is not so much a question, but I think is a really striking comment and deserves to be shown. It is extraordinary to have an Algonquian name. Many women were only documented within the context of marriage to Englishmen after receiving English names through baptism. This is a rare gift.
Yeah. So is there a way to put up the whole question? And Nikki, thanks for this question. This is really nice. There's a lot of really awesome Native women on this conversation tonight.
I cannot make it get any bigger. I don't know why it won't let me. But I'll read it. It says, after receiving English names through baptism, this is a rare gift.
Yeah. So it's really interesting because, right, the man is, he's got this funky name, Robin Montague, and who's the Indian king. So he's already got this this name. But Nannsonan has her name. It's kind of interesting too, right? You know how a lot of times, you see this in a lot of Native communities this day, especially where language is spoken more, and there's still really strong traditionalism. I see this a lot in Latin America, that the women, it's the women tend to maintain traditional dress. The women tend to maintain language, or maybe even be monolingual, indigenous, language speakers. And so, I wonder if that's part of what's going on here. But that's a really right, especially for her to have that name so late. I know it sounds like so. Most people feel like, oh, 1707, it was so long ago. But when you're talking from late 1500s on, for us 1700s it's later.
Yeah. I mean, it's especially when you think about Mary Kittamaquan, that's how we refer to her. We don't. It's by her anglicized Christian name and her father's name.
Yeah. Right.
So that is a very interesting how that happens. Another good one, good question.
Oh, hi, Gina. Really high numbers. Really high numbers. Is there an estimate of how many East Coast natives perished due to diseases around that time? There are estimates that in certain places in different waves of time, about 90% mortality. And that also helps us to understand sometimes why we don't know some things, and why we don't know a lot of things, maybe, or things have gotten forgotten. Because if you have when you have an oral society, and you think about illness, you think about who's dying with COVID now. It's older people, knowledgeable people, knowledge holding people, the history keepers. So it's really mass death is occurring throughout the hemisphere, and certainly within the East Coast. I do want to make a point about that, though. It's very interesting. There's a Cherokee demographer named Russell Thornton, and he brought up a really, really important point that stuck with me for many years, and that is that in many places, look at us now. I mean, epidemics happen, pandemics happen, mass death happens, all throughout history. The Black Death wiped out, I mean, huge numbers. What was it? I mean, you might know this, Peter, better than I. I think it was like
Third to
like a third to like, some massive, massive, massive number of Europeans, right? But the populations bounce back. So the question then is why are the populations not recovering? And so a lot of times when people talk about what happened here, they talk about it as, the pandemics are the reason why there was such a massive, population collapse, why all of these different peoples, just fell apart. But it's really important to understand that if people had been not pointedly attacked for years, that they would have recovered. That's what happens that's what happens with demographics, and it doesn't happen here. And so the notion that somehow it's not really anybody's fault is not true. And so disease is very, very important to understand. And then what's also really important to understand, there's a historian also named Jim Rice, who's up at Tufts, who's done a lot of work. He's great, really, been so supportive. He had something interesting to say. He was looking through the archaeological and historical reports, and he said that, he's like, he said, actually, the graves are not showing the kind of mass death that you would expect if disease is what kills everybody. And so we kind of like had this moment where we were like thinking about it, and we're like, if that's true, then that means it was like blatantly killing people, without it being on record. So that's another real possibility to think about, which again, it's like, it's very, this is like hard, this is hard history. It's hard history. So, I think that's, kind of looking for those spaces, but that it is very important. Right. Yeah.
and something I would add to that, if I may, which I think, looking at some of the treaties where it almost makes it, easier for English people to kill Native people. And if you're stepping onto an English person's land, make sure you put down your arms, put up your hands, take off your makeup, and holler, because if you have your makeup on, we can't tell if you're a friendly Indian or not.
Right. And it's like your fault that, talk about like, what's the law in Florida? Like the whatever, is it stand down law or something? It's just, where it justifies, justifies the murder of people. And then it's also like what kind of burden of proof is that on you if you say, oh, well, this person, I didn't know who they were, and then you're just off the hook. So I think that's something that's really important to understand, like the world that she's in. This is also a world of what you're talking about, right? Like there's the law and the treaties that say that when an Indian happens to come across a white person, that they have to throw down their arms and like announce themselves and make supplications. And it's really, I mean, what a repressive environment, and
then
mm-hmm.
Sorry, another one that is the ecological damage that I don't think gets enough discussion. That what happens when, especially in the early 17th century, when you have cows and pigs just roaming around, and we've seen through this, Dr. Parno, our head of research, found this fabulous excerpt in the archives of a man named Madigan who was pleading, like, where do we go? Your pigs and cows just keep taking over, and we have nowhere else to go. And so just the change in the ecology with new animals and new plants, just changing everything. And how does that impact a culture and society that for hundreds and hundreds of years has been living in a certain way, and in a very short time, that is just the ecology is wiped out. So you got the disease, the actual violence, and the ecologic change. It's threefold. It's very sad.
Right. Yeah, no, it's highly problematic, and you see that certainly happening at Plymouth. And then, some of this, if you ever want to watch this kind of thing in real time, if you look at places like Amazonia, where the level of damage, cattle and pigs, like, I know that I think pigs are they've caused a lot of issues in Hawaii. People love their pigs there. I'm just saying this for my cousin Sarita, but it's just there's very serious like ecological damage, right? And this all has to also then do with like this upset of balance, this relationship, your knowledge base. I love what actually Louise Baird just wrote something down where she said, I'm just looking at this like wonderful chat we're having here, where she's saying, we weren't lazy, we were chill. It's like people that work with that level of agriculture and living with land. It's like your pace of life is, maybe like explosively intense to like be hunting for a while, but then you have a break. You have this break, leisure, this capacity to think and observe and just to like live your life and be free. And this is something that when Europeans came here, they'd never seen freedom like this before. This was something they had never experienced or imagined. And I do think that, when you have that, it does work into, a distinctive, there is a major influence of that kind of viewpoint. So I think, right, there's characters here. You can't take them one. I'm so glad you brought up the ecology, because you can't take one or the other, like we can't understand what happened in Native history without understanding what happened in African American history, what happens in white history, what happens in women's history. And the other piece of that, which often gets left out and is almost seen as invisible, is, the living world. What happens with the living world, the expressions of language, the ways that you know how to be, totally also disrupts like the way that societies are organized, who has the authority. We know that, if you have people who, they're very adept and skilled in one thing, especially when you think about like women's, a lot of women's work, right? Like if, a lot of what women are doing, and then it gets replaced by, cash or alcohol for beaver trades. So like your work on other things like weaving and pottery and things that are really needed become less valued. So yeah, I've always been super curious about like what was the baseline of what was here ecologically at the time, like how many bears were there and like how many, like what was the level of like what are we talking about when we talk about loss, of people and of the environment.
I think that's a very big one and an important one. And that's something I always think about is like, what did the environment look like? What trees were here? What plants were not here? And, people get surprised when you tell them like, yeah, dandelions are not native, or earthworms are not even native to North America. They came over on ships too. It's very fascinating. And this is kind of slight segue to, I think was a very nice question that we got from a speaker that we had a couple months ago, Valerie Hall. She asks, were animals seen as more masculine in the same sense as plants being more feminine? Even though women likely processed hides, furs, skins, etc., were animals viewed as more masculine because men hunted?
That's a really good question, and I would definitely defer that. So when I'm talking about like what the masculine and the feminine are, it doesn't mean that there's not masculine and feminine within the plants and masculine and feminine within the animals. What I'm talking more about is that it's women had and still have much more of a in-depth relationship to the plant world, and men did have a much a different kind of relationship to the hunting world. It wasn't always mutually exclusive, and then there's a lot of like intersections, with fishing and oysters and other things that everybody did or everybody took a part in. And there were women also that would, they would go and support when men were hunting. It's not like there's an express taboo on women hunting. It was just definitely much more of a I would say like more of a masculine relationship. There's a spirit called Living Solid Face that was carved on stones. There was a stone face that was right at the conjunction of Piscataway Creek. And my grandfather took some ethnographers there to look at it. This was probably in 1944. And they decided they wanted to take it and take it back to the Smithsonian. So they started to jackhammer it, and it disintegrated. And kind of think about like that spirit did not want to be captured that day, but it was like also very much destroyed. So there are relationships or different color relationships as well. So some of that, the level of depth of understanding of that for us here in the Chesapeake, we have some, we do have some understandings of that, and some of that is like we know some, and then we have to try to pull it back together. But yeah, there's like masculine and feminine, parts of each thing in each piece. It's just more the relationship that people have. There's also like another way of organizing, which is what's considered animate and inanimate. So like actually rocks are considered animate, like living, moving, which is kind of, it's like super interesting. Like, and you think about it, like our people, right? They, and so many Indigenous people, it's a brilliance of spending a lot of time observing, careful, deep observation and analysis of the natural world. So sometimes people talk about like Indigenous knowledge is like anti-science. It's not. It's actually so scientific because it's based on deep observation and relationship to natural orders and balances. And the idea that, for example, rocks would be in motion. Of course they are. Their molecules are moving. The idea that we're related to stars and stars are relatives. Well, yes, trace minerals, star minerals are in our bodies. Amazing, right? So, people say, well, how would they know that? Like, why are they, that's, that was considered savage, barbaric to have that kind of view. So, yeah. So, yeah. Oh, Aaliyah's bringing up a point about masculine and feminine relationships with beings instead of rule. Yeah. And that's a core idea. Thank you for bringing that up. That's a really core idea of an Indigenous perspective, is the idea that it's a relationship and not a product. A reciprocity, not an extraction. So it's a different kind of way of being and ordering of an idea.
And thank you for answering that question from the person who asked the question from Digger.
A great question.
And I smiled earlier when you talked about raw star material, because that just reminded me of one of my favorite Carl Sagan quotes. So,
me too. and for those of people that know me who are on this chat, they know I have a nerd crush on Neil deGrasse Tyson. So, yeah.
Who doesn't love him, right?
Right.
Got a question asking. I'll put it up there because it is a good. It's a question, and judging from the last name, is someone from the tribe.
Yeah, Sarita. She was in one of our photos. Thank you for sending the picture and for being here. And just that idea that, Piscataway women are everywhere, doing great things. So, where her burial location would have been, that's a great question. I'm figuring it must have been somewhere in the vicinity of Chaptico. I don't know where exactly those burials are. And, that's another really interesting question about finding out, because so many of our burials, right? Like so many of our burials were desecrated and taken out throughout this area and are in the natural history repository in Suitland. And, how did they, if they left her bones but took her things, is she still there? Like if they took the things but left her body, is she still there? Is Nansen still there? Maybe we need to go make a pilgrimage to Chaptico. I think we maybe need to do that. I'm just saying it to the sisterhood out here. Yeah. So come back to Maryland. We'll go over there. Yeah.
Saw another nice quote or comment that just came up about roles and who does what or who doesn't do what, and I think this person has a very nice perspective.
It's like I was like there's roles, and it's just like as if you're performing something and like you fit in something. I mean, I get it, right? We use these words, right? You get down in sociology, but I love it. Responsibilities are really important. Thank you. I think it's really important, like when we're talking about rematriation, rematriating, indigenizing language, like it's such a project for us. So much happened to us. Um, and so, really at a point where we can have this kind of conversation, really think about it, um, spend time like this. It's pretty new, and then we don't have to worry so much. Like I love that it's okay for us to take the different positions that we're in. Maybe I'm mooching around in the archives. Somebody else has a different way of thinking about something. It's all really needed. Even like being able to look at work that happens in like ethical, what we call ethical archaeology. Archaeology was so fraught for so many years before the repatriation laws. Wouldn't even want to be able to, hardly like talk to anybody because like what if they come in like they rip somebody's grandma out of the ground, I mean seriously, like it was like people wouldn't want to ever talk to you because I mean people would never want to talk to an archaeologist hardly at all because if I tell you something you're going to take it. And now we do have a shift in power relationships and we do have people who are really allied archaeologists, indigenous archaeologists, right? And so how much that can enhance it and we can get some of this information and also like say this is like we're saying well, this is like hitting a line here and I don't feel comfortable, but it was like a mega no and huge conflict for many years, and I also feel like that really was problematic on both sides. So yeah, I appreciate that. I'm not sure who S. Proctor is, but hey, thank you for making that remark.
And then not too many more other questions, but lots of comments on your earlier comment about going to Chaptico. Lots of people, Aaliyah, Hope, S. Proctor saying, yes, let's do that.
See what you did,
so-
Peter? What did you do? Right. And no, but seriously, I think that would be great. And this is like, I love it. Because here's the other thing is, I feel like we need to keep going to these places. It's different when you're there, like you're on the ground. I mean, we go to Mayon, which is beautiful, and powerful and important. And then there's so many other spaces and places. I just feel like we need to go and touch them again. I feel like we should go greet Nannsonan again. Like everybody in Maryland should know her name. Why is she so faceless and nameless? This amazing, important woman who just we meet in a line in an archive. How much more there is to her. So, and all these other people. And again, when you're talking about rematriation and the feminine, it's not about excluding the masculine at all. It's rebalancing. It's rebalancing because we've been so focused on, like there's not a whole lot on the men chiefs either. Okay. Like it's pretty bad, but I just think, that sense of actually being physically in a location and you can kind of see like how the water is flowing there and like where she is. It's very distinctive. I love what they've done up in Seneca. There's a Seneca project, Ganandagan, that is the town that the first clan mother is from, Ningajagonsasa. And you go and you're like, wow, this person was there, right? Like this person was actually there, and you get a sensibility. So, the idea of like creating like sites that belong in our history and our relationship to them, and not just for them to be performing about like, oh, this is how the Indians lived. It's like that's it's nice to see that, but like, how does this sit with us? How does this create meaning for us? And getting to a deeper level to it. So yeah, I see a whole bunch of people are like, oh, Salida. Hey, Salida. Okay, that's who that is. Great. So I think it'd be amazing.
Yeah, the place is very important. And when I was in graduate school, I read this book a couple times, The Power of Place.
Mm-hmm.
It's very true that it's one thing to read the history. It's one thing to maybe go to a building that's recreated to look like a place, but it's not really where it was. But when you actually go to the location, it has meaning, and there's different meanings based on your own levels. Especially, like, I just remember when I went to my grandmother's home in Ireland and my grandfather's house in Ireland, and
Wow.
my grandfather told me some stories about what happened to him with loving the English and the black and tans. And I was just like, what is he talking about? A big mountain in Ireland? This can't be a big mountain, because I grew up in New Mexico and El Paso. Those are mountains. But when I got there, I was like, oh, and it was really neat. And then seeing this is where my family came from, and this is their environment, and it gave me a better understanding of my grandparents. And I think, all people should be respectful of other individuals' spaces and places of their ancestors, because it has that connection for them, even if it might not have that connection to us.
Right.
Because we all have a place that we can connect to.
Right. Yeah, I know it's really important for you to bring that up because, for Piscataway, right? Like, this is the old country. Like, this is it. And I think to like, yeah, it's very moving to go to the place, and then you can also see like, well, how did that river actually move, and how what was her perspective? What was the perspective of the people, right? And maybe like follow up. I know it's under like private ownership, but they're there. Like, I mean, with the archaeological projects are there. I'm sure we could go. We can go. I know this is like on YouTube, like forever. So we'll just go get lost when we take this turn of the road and end up in there. No, it'd be awesome. That's another thing, so many of these places, right? This place, I think Chaptico is, look, this was our last, protected territory. Like that was, legally understood. It was also not a place, there's a place like called Zakaya Fort, which that was like a place of captivity, and so like if we can go more towards like where the places where there was like still an expression of sovereignty and power. I think that's very liberating for us to go to a place like that.
I like this. This is just a new one that just came in. I'll read the rest of it. Same principle applies to documents. Sometimes you find new things in the original documents that get left out of the published or digitized version. Maybe Nansen wants to be known.
I agree. Yes, that's so important, right? Like, so that's the thing. Like, it was really, really awesome. Like, when you have the digitized version, because you can find stuff you didn't think that you could find. It just makes it easier, and sometimes things turn up in unexpected ways. But I agree with you with there is something really also powerful about looking at the original documents. You kind of see like what's on one page, what's on the other, what's this fold, like what's this crease? Oh wait, like when I found when I went to take a look at Powhatan's mantle, and then I went to look at the John Smith map as well. I didn't realize that the John Smith map was folded up into a book. I'm like, oh, I was like, what's this? It's like in this little, like, it's like this propaganda book, like getting people excited about coming to, the New World. And, you see it digitized and you see the reprint, whatever, but you see it out of context. And it makes such a huge difference when you see it, like, when you actually go and you look at something, the real, the actual real is so important. So I think like for us to start to develop this relationship to the real, to the place, to the document, to the material, and it's great to have things digitized. Obviously, we love this. We work with this. It helps us. But there's nothing like the real thing, baby, right? Like, I mean, it just isn't. And I think that's something that's really important. I think that St. Mary's is facilitating too, is this, ways to help us understand what is real and how that enlightens us, and just, like with you, like opening this this dialogue for us in this venue. We don't get a chance to talk like this much, and just bringing up the questions that are being brought up. It's just, just in this session, I think, helping us think through things, together, even if you're all like in a little chat box over there and like, just I miss you. I want to see everybody. So that's really, really essential work. I do think Nannsonan wanted to be found. She it just been this intense silence for so long. Welcome, Nancy.
Lots of things. I think this is a very nice conversation that we are having, and it's makes me wonder if this was in our auditorium, if we would be having the same conversation.
I don't know. It's a great, that's a point, because we all love St. Mary's, but you guys are really far away. Like, you know what I mean? It's like, it's a lot to drive down. Like, having the streaming, maybe like a hybrid, you know, where, you know, some of it's in person, but people can also stream in and ask questions and talk. You know, that's maybe, you know, something that's a good development here, because it's hard for folks to, especially on a weeknight, you know, to drive down, as wonderful as it is, you know, to have this additional capacity for us to talk.
I liked it. It's making me think of other ideas and how we can continue in the future at St. Mary's to have these types of, you know, not lectures, but a lecture hybrid conversation, and maybe even more conversation, because, you know, I always find conversation, you know, the Socratic method in a way of learning is sometimes more valuable, because both people get to bring themselves into the fold and learn from each other.
Yeah, no, I love it. It's really special. Like, you know, do these kinds of, you know, like talks, and increasingly more online. But this one is a really good one tonight, and really, really special. It feels like a lot of synergy. I see folks, you know, on the side, and everybody wanted to connect and learn. And I think, you know, we have a we have an ancestress to thank for that tonight. You know, for Nansen, you know. So anyway, yeah, I think we'll definitely like have to continue. This is just, you know, it's not a beginning, but it's like another step along the way. And I'm glad I got a chance to share this with folks, and to like continue to think and talk about her, and about each other, you know, in a good way, a good positive way.
Thank you, Gabby. This has really been nice. And I just saw the time. I'm like, wow, this has been such a fun, great time. And
I know, we've all been talking.
Having a good time. And so I hope everyone else out there.
Yeah, I know. But anyway, let everybody get back to their, you know, I don't know if somebody needed to move from like their dining room table to their couch or whatever. But anyway, it's a important time. So with that, I'll say Wanishi, and thank you to all of you that were online, and we'll all be in touch, and keep creating, and keep bringing up the names, keep saying her name, keep saying their names, and asking them to be with us. All right. Thanks, Peter.
Thank you, Gabby. And thank you, everyone else, for coming out tonight. Have a good evening.
Wonderful.